Welcome everyone to the Crushing Small Stakes PLO course. In this episode I will introduce you to the Preflop chart specifically designed for PLO 50 rake levels. As many of you already know, we have been working with Preflop chart for many years now within Jane Anna's Poker. As there are so many hands possibly being dealt in PLO, you don't want to focus too much on individual hand combinations, but rather focus on categories that are combining different hands together based on similar characteristics. This is exactly what the Preflop chart is doing for you. In addition to the Preflop chart, we also have the Preflop helper, and the Preflop helper is a tool in our Discord channel. The Preflop helper allows you to look up for individual hand combinations and to understand how that specific hand should be played preflop. Now the Preflop chart on the other hand is focused on categories, to learn more about the overall strategy between similar hands. So these tools work very nicely together. On the one hand we have the helper, the Preflop helper, focusing on individual hands, and on the other hand we have the Preflop chart, focusing on categories based on similar characteristics. Now in the near future we will also have our software, which is going to combine the best of both. In our software, we will upload all the preflop ranges, also for low stake rake levels, so the PLO 50 rake levels here, and this will allow you to understand more about the categories, but also right away about individual hand combinations. And in addition to that, it will give you the option to train and test yourself based on those categories or based on individual hand combinations. But for now we're going to focus on the Preflop chart. It is built for PLO 50 rake levels, and I will let you know how to read and how to work with this. So what you see here on the window is the Preflop chart and the first section of it, which is about raising first in. We're also going to talk about versus one raiser and versus one raiser and one caller. But I will first talk about raise first in, because if you understand how to read this, then it's very likely that you also will understand how to read the other sections. So what we see here in the beginning is the entire strategy of Preflop from under the gun as the RFI player. The position and the action is told here, right away, in the beginning, in the first row. Now we have different columns and different actions and different ranges here, and I will tell you what they are about. The first column tells you the number of the category. So we have category 1 until category 18 here. The second column tells you more about the suitedness of the category. A category can be focused on double suited hands, or a category can be focused on single suited and rainbow hands. The third column tells you more about the description of the category. In other words, what is the category about? For example, we have a category focused on aces, we have a category focused on Broadway pairs, we have a category focused on mid-low pairs, on rundowns, on 3 Broadway cards with 1 non-Broadway card. We have a category about 2 Broadway cards and 2 low connectors. We have a category focused on 3 card rundown and a Broadway card. We have the racked hands, which are all the worst and disconnected hands, and we have double paired hands. In total we have 18 categories here. It is possible to split up all the hands, of course, in less ranges or in more ranges. Let's call them categories, that makes it easier. You can split them up into more categories or less categories. But for this instance I chose 18 categories. I went a little bit less specific than what we have been doing within the past, where we used 76 categories. And the reason is because in the back of my mind I'm already thinking about the software that we're going to use. And in the software it's anyway possible for you to go very specific into individual categories, into individual hand examples, and to learn more about the strategy there. So we don't need to go very specific with the chart anymore, because in the near future the software will actually do that for us. However, this tool is still very helpful, and it allows you to get a good overall understanding and patterns about the strategy here. Okay, so in column D here you can see the hand range, which describes the best hand of the category and the worst hand of the category. For example, if we look at category 3, we see Broadway pairs. If we then look in the hand range, we can see the best Broadway pair, which is ace, king, king, queen, and the worst Broadway pair, which is 10, 10, 3 deuce. Remember that Broadway pairs are kings to tens here, because aces are already being discussed in category 1 and category 2. In column E, we can then see the actual RFI frequency, what it's all about. Here we can see the overall RFI strategy from under the gun, which is 16.8% to open raise. And below that, you can see the open raising frequency for each of the individual categories. So for example, double-suited aces should be raised 100% of the time, double-suited Broadway pairs 53% of the time, single-suited or rainbow Broadway pairs 24% of the time, etc. If you go through this yourself, you will get a much better feeling and understanding of the ranges. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can see the frequencies right here. Now the next section is about facing a 3-bet. If you get 3-bet from early position, you can be out of position or you can be in position. Now when you're out of position, I chose versus MP 3-bet. And here you can see the fold, the call, and the 4-bet ranges and frequencies. So if we get 3-bet by MP, we can see that we should fold 49% of the time, we're calling 32, and we're 4-betting 19. Now below these frequencies, you can see the action and response for each category when getting 3-bet. So for example, aces here, the first column, double-suited aces, we're folding 0% of the time, we're calling 0% of the time, and we're 4-betting 100% of the time with double-suited aces. You can look up the rest of the strategy here yourself, but it allows you to understand more about facing a 3-bet with these different categories. Now the same is true here for when you face a 3-bet and you're in position. So let's imagine you open raise from early position and the small blind 3-bets you. Post flop, you now will be in position, and this is a response for you when you get 3-bet. So we see we're folding 31%, we're calling 53%, and we're 4-betting 16% of the time. I hope this lets you understand quite a bit about the under the gun RFI strategy and about the response versus the 3-bet. Now obviously we don't see any specific hand examples here, which is why we have the Preflop helper and in the near future the software. This is a tool to understand the categories and the overall strategy behind them. If you scroll down, you can see the different positions. So here in the middle we have MP RFI, scroll down we have cutoff RFI, we have button RFI, and small blind RFI. You might notice here the gap, which basically means that if we open raise from the button and we get 3-bet, we're always going to be in position, which is here. So we cannot be out of position, and therefore the section versus 3-bet being out of position is empty here. The same goes for small blind, but then the other way around. If you open raise from the small blind and the big blind is 3-betting you, you're going to be out of position and you cannot be in position, so there's no response versus in position here. So this is the RFI strategy. You can see the tab here below, which tells you RFI. But we also have versus 1 raiser, which is this, and we have versus 1 raiser and 1 caller. If you look into versus 1 raiser, you can see one main distinction, and that is we're either in position versus 1 raiser or we're out of position versus 1 raiser. For example, we're in position when we are in MP and the under the gun player is open raising. We're also in position on the button and the under the gun player is raising. We can be in position button versus cutoff. We also can be in position big blind versus small blind. Now below each of these titles, basically you can see the strategy for that specific situation. So if we are in MP and the under the gun raise, we're folding 90.7% of the time. We're only calling 3.7 and we're 3-betting 5.7% of the time. Now below these numbers, again, you can see the strategy for all the categories broken down here. So aces, mid-low pairs, 2 Broadway, 2 low connectors, ragged hands, etc. You can look it up here yourself. These are all in position. On the other hand, we have of course the out of position strategy, which is mainly going to be when you're calling from the blinds, so either the big blind or the small blind. So here you can see the out of position strategy, big blind versus under the gun, we have big blind versus cutoff, big blind versus button, and small blind versus button. This is versus 1 raiser. Then lastly, we also have versus 1 raiser and 1 caller. So here you can see how often we should fold, call, or squeeze. For example, we're either in position, again, the main differentiation here, we're in position or we're out of position. When we're in position, we can be, for example, cutoff versus an early position raise and an MP cold call, or it's button versus an MP raise and a cutoff cold call. Out of position, we can be in the big blind versus a tight early position raise and a button cold call, or we can be in the big blind versus a cutoff raise and a button cold call, for example. Again, you can here see the response, folding, calling, or 3-betting, or in other words, squeezing. I hope this allows you to understand a little bit more about the preflop strategy in the end, and gives you a good understanding of how you should actually play preflop at PLO 50 rate levels. For those of you who are also working with Monker Solver, or who are going to work with the software in the near future, there's also the syntax in the first step, and this allows you to copy-paste, for example, the syntax for each of the categories right away into, for example, Monker or into our software, and that will help you to get a better visual understanding of the range more in depth. These ranges, by the way, can also be utilized in Pro Poker Tools if you're ever working with that. So, for now, I will keep it like this. The download of this chart, you can find it below the episode, below the first episode. I will recommend you to download it, to dive a little bit into it, to get a feeling for it, what it's about, how to work with it, and eventually to use this chart in addition to the preflop helper and the software. It's a tool that is very powerful on its own, but it becomes even more powerful when you use it with the preflop chart and in the end with the software as well. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to let me know below the video. And for now, I will see you in the next video. Over and out. This was Luuk for the PLO Mastermind.